So the temperature gauge is gonna rise somewhere between 225 and 250. We're about 250 right now. And the smoke should be what they call thin and blue, which you can barely see any smoke on the video at all because it is dark outside. But as you can tell, there is no white puffy smoke coming out, which is what we want. Maybe I've just seen Fright Night one too many times, but I'm just gonna say every time I have been outside on a late night smoke, no matter what the temperature or what season it is, my neighbor back here is always in his backyard, doing something in the dark, yard work, letting the dogs out, just standing on his patio. Can't quite figure him out. Gotta be a vampire. It's kind of a windy night, and as I've added some wood back to this fire, I've got some of that puffy white smoke I was talking about that we do not want to get into the cook chamber with the meat as much as we can avoid it. So right now I have the firebox open because I am going to adjust the fire and let that white smoke come back out this way. The cook chamber is going to get a little cool for a minute, but not enough to really affect the smoking process. Big thing is we don't want to get that puffy white smoke trapped in there with the meat as much as possible. So adjusting the fire, adding back some charcoal, adjusting the airflow both here. Can open that up a little bit. I can even just go ahead and open the door to the firebox to get some more oxygen flow. That creates a cleaner burn. And then of course, you can also adjust it up here on the chimney. So the rule is that you leave your brisket alone for the first 45 minutes of the cook. And then after that, about every 15 minutes, you're gonna open it and you're gonna spray it down, give it a little spritz with either a half and half mixture of apple juice and water or apple cider vinegar and water. I personally absolutely loathe the smell and taste of apple cider vinegar. So I instead use a little bit of apple juice and water instead. Gonna make it nice and moist. I know that is everybody's favorite word who is watching, and that in addition to our little water bottles will help kind of keep some humidity in there. We had a little bit of an issue with the smoke again. It's kind of a windy night, so lots of firebox regulating tonight. Hopefully not affecting our smoke too much, but we will find out in the morning. I had to pause filming again because now I have two neighbors outside at almost midnight yelling at their dogs and doing something odd in the backyard I can't figure out. I heard some popping noises and I'm starting to think that maybe neighbor A is hunting moles or something in his backyard. Why? The night before Easter? I'm just not gonna ask. I find that this is the most efficient and professional way to add apple juice to a food grade spray bottle. Once you've got it all in there, add some water so you've got about a 50-50 mixture, and we will use that about 45 minutes into the cook to start spraying down our brisket and keeping it moist to kind of lock in all those flavors and create that nice crust that you see on the outside of a brisket. You may have noticed that my dry rub does not include any brown sugar or sugar of any sort, and that is very intentional on my part. After reviewing a lot of recipes, I noticed that a lot of people put a little brown sugar in their dry rub, but then they use a 50-50 mixture of apple cider vinegar and water to moisten their brisket with throughout the smoking process. And I absolutely detest the smell and flavor of apple cider vinegar. So I found an alternate method that works better for me, in which I use half apple juice and half water to moisten my brisket. So I have omitted any sugar from the rub because it's getting a little bit of sugar from the apple juice. It's 10 till midnight and my neighbor has finally shut off his patio lights and gone inside. Wonder what he's doing. Weirdo. So I'm about 4 hours in at this point, and this is where I start cheating. I've got some peach butcher paper here and a pan. I am going to transfer this brisket into the butcher paper, wrap it up like a pretty little present, and put it in the oven for the remainder of the cook. So it's wrapped up nice and pretty in that peach parchment paper, ready to go in the oven at about 225 for the rest of the cook. Now just remember, with a brisket, it is about a 12-hour cooking process, so that's why I opt to stay up late if I'm doing a later lunch kind of thing with it. You can also use foil for this step. I've used both. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference. I find that the parchment maybe keeps it just a little bit less moist, which when I'm using the oven I like, because it does have a tendency to fall apart if you trap it in there with foil and with all of the fats as it renders down and the humidity. It does kind of tend to fall apart more like a roast with the foil than with the parchment paper, but by using this kind of crutch method with the oven, that's kind of a risk I run anyway.
So I messed up just a little bit with this brisket because I was working this week and I completely forgot to get it out of the freezer in time. So it takes a few days for a brisket this large to thaw out. If you have it frozen, just kind of keep that in mind. It will take you probably at least 3 days. I pulled it out on Friday morning to cook Saturday night, and I should have pulled it out on Thursday morning because Friday night it was still kind of frozen in the middle, so I did not achieve optimal temperature with this cook. Now, brisket snobs will tell you that somewhere in the neighborhood of 203 degrees Fahrenheit is the perfect brisket temperature for when it's done. I do not know who pulled the number 203 out of where, but I will say that I have, on my last couple of attempts, not quite achieved that until after it had been wrapped and rested for a little bit. So I don't focus quite as much on that temperature, because at some point, especially if you're finishing out in the oven and wrapped or crutched like I was doing, it will start to fall apart as it reaches those higher temperatures. So wouldn't focus so much on that as maybe the time of the cook, unless you're an idiot like me and start with a slightly frozen center. So once we have hit that time frame around 12 hours, or if you are a little bit better at this than I am, maybe actually checking the temperature of it before you wrap it at somewhere around 200 degrees, you're going to take the brisket out in the butcher paper. I also put a little bit of lining of foil underneath it so that it wouldn't leak through the butcher paper into the towel. Wrap it in a towel and place it in a cooler for 1 hour to rest, to kind of get the juices kind of back up into the meat, and it will continue to cook for that hour at that kind of slow temperature, and will actually come up a little bit higher by the time you take it out of the cooler. So if it's not quite at 200 when you put it in, I wouldn't stress a whole lot, because it probably is going to be there when you get it out and get it ready to cut. Now onto the finished product. I'm just going to say it right off the bat, this is not the best brisket that I have ever made, and only because I was filming it to show you guys, right? It's not terrible, but there are a couple things that I definitely wish had gone better. One of the things is I did not quite get that fat on the top layer trimmed down low enough to render all the way down. What I really like on a brisket is for that top layer of fat to render all the way down, so that it's just that little tiny thin strip that you can just like have melt in your mouth with a bite and not have to trim off with your knife. And this is definitely one that we had to do some trimming on. One of the things I'll say is that it was a prime cut of beef, and I'm definitely more used to working with choice, which is a little bit less marbled, a little less fatty. I trimmed probably close to 2 pounds of fat off of this thing, and yet still did not get it low enough to render all the way down on the smoker. So definitely my bad on that part. The other part is I should have definitely gotten it out of the freezer at least 24 hours earlier than I did, so it did take a lot longer than it should have to come up to temperature. I did wind up having to pull it a little bit earlier than I wanted to, so that I did not ruin Easter lunch, but it was not terrible. It just was not quite as tender as I would have liked it to be. Smoke ring was there, the crust was there, the flavor was there. I got no complaints. At lunch, didn't see the dog eating a whole lot of it, so I'm going to go ahead and call it a win. I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope you guys have a very happy Easter. Thanks for watching.